Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Grande Bouffe.
The Big Feast.
With myself, Cole Smithey, and my co-host, Mike Lacy. As we like to do, we are here to copiously consume international politics and culture through the prism of a single film and a different craft beer each and every week.
Twice on Sunday. Not really, but you can listen to two on Sunday. That's fine.
And I think that we do have listeners who listen to our podcast more than once.
It seems like it.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I don't know if the stats are getting weird, but a couple people, you seem to listen to more episodes than exist.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I noticed that trend.
I'm just flattered. The idea that somebody wants to listen to my beautiful radio voice in all of its deep, dulcet tones over and over. Cole's making a face at me like he doesn't agree. Let's jump into what we're drinking here. This is a Flying Dog that has not been on the show, I believe. Even though
it made it. Snake Dog has made an appearance on one of our early episodes.
Oh, did it?
It did, and I chose it because of the artwork. Because Ralph Steadman does all of the art.
I thought about doing a Ralph Steadman.
Yeah, it seemed like an obvious choice, and then I discovered that Ralph Steadman was born in 36, and Robert Crumb was born in 43. I'm double checking my dates here.
Steadman really predates him. That's impressive.
But they are both very rebellious figures in the art world for good reason.
Steadman had his own documentary come out a lot more recently than this Crumb one.
Yeah, that was a really good one. Did you see that?
I didn't. We should do a suite because we're gonna do two in a row.
Yeah.
On these comic book authors, and then Steadman, who's not a comic book per se.
Yeah.
Not a graphic.
Can you grab
artist.
that bobblehead over there?
Yeah, I saw this.
Now, what I think is, I wonder if Ralph Steadman has his own bobblehead, because Harvey Pekar has his bobblehead from American Splendor.
So this is basically going to be an official two-parter, I would say, because it's hard to talk about one of these films without talking in depth about another one.
Well, you could, and that's the interesting aspect. One of the interesting aspects of it is that Harvey Pekar and Robert Crumb were friends in Ohio. They became friends, and we're going to talk about American Splendor after this one, but there would probably not have been a Harvey Pekar as we know it had he not developed that friendship with Robert Crumb.
Well, we'll get into it next time, but it seems the film makes it seem explicit that sort of the Campbellian stage of meeting with the goddess is Robert Crumb. He sort of holds the keys to his future. But let's get into
we gotta finish talking about the beer.
Into the beer.
Yeah,
is what I was gonna say.
That's perfect. Yeah, it's the Snake Dog IPA. It's a go-to for me. 7.1 ABV. It's a lovely IPA. It's
really light. This is a good introductory IPA. It is not gonna snap your neck back.
But it's got a little skunkiness to it. It's so delicious. I really like it. It's got a little zip, a little zang.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to place. What sort of flavors do you think are in there? There's something a bit unusual.
I don't know. It's a question of what kind of hops that they use in the beer, and I don't know offhand what it is. But the Flying Dog, Snake Dog IPA, and it's got this great artwork by Ralph Steadman with a monkey and a snake. It looks like. Even though I guess that's just a really ugly dog. I guess it's not a monkey. It looks like it could be a monkey. It's a monkey dog, I say. It's a monkey snake dog.
It's kind of horrifying.
Yeah. So Terry Zwigoff's second film.
On our podcast.
Crumb.
Is it his second film, period?
It's his second film. Louis Bluey was his first. And he was playing in a band, in an old-timey music band with Crumb. And so
was it a blues band specifically?
I think so.
Yeah.
And so they knew they knew each other from their musical relationship.
Yeah, it seems that there's a fourth wall broken in this, where not only do we hear Zwigoff speak as you do in a few documentaries, but there's illustrations of him from decades back in one of the sketchbooks that Crumb pulls out. So there's a bit of pulling back the veil to its creation,
and they have certain characteristics that they share. They both look like these nerdy individuals who dress kind of crumpily, very
old, mid-century, non-modern is how I would describe their dress. They're at least Crumb, who I can speak more legitimately about from the this film being the backstory for him. He's an interesting symbol for iconoclasm, and I how would you say that word? Iconoclasm?
Iconoclastic individuals?
Iconoclasticism?
Iconoclasticism, that sounds good.
He's an interesting model because he is both very outrageous and transgressive, and at the same time completely kids these days, and is hearkening back to a time when America was really terrible. He's sort of a champion of when the past was the present and was awful. He's a misanthrope for sure. And there's so many interesting facets to his personality. He's a very kind individual. I mean, I want to just break off for a second and say that I met Crumb when I was in Cannes at a screening for the Metallica documentary. This was back in 2004, and it was before American Splendor. I wish I had known at the time about his relationship to Harvey Pekar, because he was living in France at the time, and so it wasn't a long drive for he and his wife to come over. Anyway, he and his wife were standing in front of me, waiting online, and so I chatted with him for about 20 minutes. And he was just like he is in the movie. He's this really nice, loquacious, happy-go-lucky person who's just, like a great guy to just stand online and chat with. And the funny thing, of course, was that we finally got into the documentary after waiting online for 25 minutes. And then after about 15 or 20 minutes of the documentary, he didn't like it. He and his wife got up and walked out. I was going to say, Metallica seems like exactly something he'd hate.
I know. It was funny that they were online to see that movie. But yeah, he just ended up walking out.
I thought it was a documentary about metallics.
No, he knew it was Metallica.
It seems like he is a very friendly, gregarious person, and that's simultaneously a terrible person to date and have a close relationship with.
But that's one of the most interesting things about this movie, is that because of the way he put his fetishism on display for all to see. Oh, that's what I was telling you before the podcast started, that I remember things in the movie that I didn't see in the movie. Right. And so I don't know if I saw them somewhere else, but I remember him talking about all these women that he was dating, and there were these conflicts between, he was living on some kind of commune or something, and these women had a big knockdown drag out fight over him.
Yeah, I haven't seen that,
and I don't think that's in this documentary. I don't know where I got that information from, but before he settled down with his wife, and you can see it in the movie where he's giving signatures, and this callipyginous woman.
Excuse me.
Callipyginous is a term for women with large asses.
Oh,
and that is the Robert Crumb type,
right?
And he likes to ride on them. He likes to piggyback on women with thick thighs.
We see that at least once.
And big butts. And so anyway, by putting his fetish out there so for everyone to see in his artwork, he attracted those women. And I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it does seem, and we'll get into this with Pekar as well, is there is a message for the people who see themselves as freaks, is if you're true to yourself, this is sort of these words that people say, if you're true to yourself, it seems like, if you build it, they will come. And like, I think was proven true in his case, at least, is that he's so explicitly put out what he was interested in, obsessed with, grappling with, that both professionally and romantically and socially, the world sort of showed up around him, and even despite coming from a very working class world, he wasn't born into an artist community that was waiting for him to flourish. There's a lot of the classic American adversity and dad who wanted something very different from his boys, and I say boys to...
Well, his dad was a fucking asshole.
Yeah.
His dad was one of those World War II era...
Well, clearly very PTSD'd and had a deep strain of narcissism that wanted everything to be in his image and couldn't handle.
And had 3 boys who could not be more opposite to what his idea of the ideal macho male persona should be.
Yeah, and who all, whether because of his rejection of them and it seems like violence towards them, or in addition to Robert Crumb, he comes off as a very fucked up dude and the most functional Crumb that we meet.
Well, that's what I was going to say is, the mom, who we do get a little glimpse of in the movie, does not seem like the most responsible parent. Crumb, was he the middle of the 3 brothers? Is he the middle brother or the youngest brother?
I'm trying to recall. I'm not positive.
I don't know, but either way, the brothers, the 3 brothers they talk about in the movie, they slept in the same bed until they were 16. And we're not talking about a king size bed. And you're squeezing 3 teenage boys in a twin. I don't even think it was a queen. It's just weird. And so we meet each of the brothers. What are their names?
Charles. And Maxon, Max, Maxon.
Maxon, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting when Crumb is with them, because he's very, just like he is every other time, he's very jovial and happy to be there, even though when he's with Charles, who lives with his mom and never leaves the house, the whole house smells like cat pee and is just, you can tell it's an awful place to be. But Crumb is just fine with his brother, and they hang out, and they're chatty.
I don't feel the urge to criticize him too much, but it almost seems like what allows Robert to thrive where his other brothers are struggling is maybe not necessarily his art. Possibly it's his success, but Maxon is seemingly almost equally talented artist.
Yeah.
He can
and his
himself.
Influence on Crumb was very important.
Right. He started drawing the comics,
and he would give these assignments to Robert to do, and Robert had to just follow orders and do that stuff.
So this film does a really interesting sort of triptych with these 3 brothers, and you sort of can't help but really wonder what allowed Robert to thrive where these 2 other brothers that seem like iterations on a theme can hardly manage to, one, leave the house and the other keep from literally molesting people on the street. Maxon has a history of sexual violence.
And that story that Maxon tells is so beyond the pale. You know what I'm talking about.
About when he's in a grocery store and he
pulls the woman's shorts down, and it's terrifying because he's explaining everything so matter of factly, and his obsession is not unlike Crumb's obsession.
Right.
There's another time when Crumb is talking about how he feels like he needs to do something transgressive in the street. He needs to do something antisocial, and we're going to talk more about this because Harvey Pekar has that same bent. So it's interesting how somehow Crumb made lemonade from lemons,
right? And
also I want to touch on what you said about iconoclastic. One of the things that makes him such an iconoclast is that he had created these huge cultural touchstones. Felix the Cat and the trucking guy that it's just embedded in all of our social consciousness. And so he was getting all of these huge offers from Hollywood to make movies, and he turned all that money down flat.
Right.
And that is just, Picard, he was friends with Picard, and Picard is like, what are you doing, man? I would kill to have that kind of opportunity. And Crumb's just, no, he's just not having it. It's not what he wants. Doesn't give a fuck about money.
Yeah, so what we haven't really done, and what I want to give the film great credit for, because this film is my only really exposure when I saw it to Robert Crumb, is it, as biography documentaries go, is excellent at laying out what his role in society is. Where it starts with him giving essentially a lecture on himself, or at least the portion where he's explaining his bona fides of why he's giving that lecture. And I think this movie is a masterclass in demonstrating someone's worthiness as a documentary subject, using really brilliant montages, covering their work. It's a really fine job where it focuses in on a drawing that he's done or a painting and follows it in a tight zoom onto an element, transitions to a different piece, but that seems to be a similar element of that. And so you start connecting the dots. You start seeing him shift, and these tones and these themes emerge. All of this without me having seen tons of his comics.
No, it's beautifully edited. It's so tightly edited that you just swim with the movie. And I love when they go through the whole cartoon. Remember the thing about the woman with no head?
Right. It's a really interesting piece.
And they take you through the whole cartoon, and it's a
comic.
Yeah, it's a comic, and you're getting these multiple perspectives from women and from critics, and also from Crumb about this cartoon, this very particular cartoon. And I can see all of the viewpoints. I can see why people would think, that women would be offended by it. And I can also see how, from an artist's point of view, he's not holding anything back. He's doing, he's letting his imagination just run rampant. And that's a beautiful thing to witness, because you know it when you see it. When somebody's just letting it run, and he's certainly got he's got stuff on his mind. Oh, and the incest thing, we talked about the movie
way before Game of Thrones, and we were all into this.
Well, we talked about what's the movie about the joke the inside joke that comics like to tell each other.
The Aristocrats.
The Aristocrats. Oh, this is the Aristocrats squared. It's awesome. So,
one thing that this film does that is such a masterclass is it gives you an appreciation, this overview, and then these really harsh critiques of this person that you're seeing. It's amazing. It's coming from someone who has such an inside scoop and is not afraid to go to the editor of Mother Jones, who lays out and eviscerates his point of view and why the person who you're spending 2 hours watching this documentary about is a horrible influence on society. And then I just want to hit again that when they go through that comic, that is such a fascinating thing to go beat by beat by beat. It's like if there was a documentary on Kubrick and you're like, and then he made this movie, and then you make that movie, and he influenced this, and then you just had Kubrick talk about all of A Clockwork Orange, shot for shot, to get
context,
an insight,
and really specific, to dig really, to just drill down on this example and really look at this example.
And you step into the eyes of the person that's making this and see that these things are moving through him. He doesn't have as coherent an understanding of what he was saying, and these people who are trying to tear him apart.
Well, and then there's that great scene where he sits in a cafe on Haight Street with a woman, a very bright young woman, and
she's a journalist that seems to be
and she's taking him to task, and he's perfectly happy to sit there and have the conversation and explain himself. He doesn't feel threatened or anything. He's perfectly willing to grapple with these things as as the artist that he is. It's really refreshing.
But you know what's interesting about this film is it reminds me a bit of The Act of Killing. You've seen that one?
Oh yeah,
where.
it.
So I'll stick to this one right now and draw out the comparison. One could say that Robert Crumb is not a dangerous influence at all. He's merely helping sublimate these problematic underlying desires that people have, and how underneath the idyllic 50s home life situation are these horrible impulses that are Freudian naturalness of incest, and his like depictions of racism, and not even so much seeming like critiques of racism, but maybe even jaunts of indulging it. There are people in this film who defend that and who are saying that like, oh, this violence, this sexual violence, this racial violence, it needs to come to the surface. But when you look at his brothers in like the ground that he's coming from, these are people who could have been him, who did act on these things. You can say, well, they didn't sublimate it, so they didn't.
Well,
so
Maxon did. Charles did.
Yeah, Charles didn't. He locked himself away, but Charles
never had sex.
Charles had deep, apparently homicidal tendencies. So when you're seeing an artist putting these things forward, it loses a bit of the idea that this is just imaginative play. When you have one brother who said he struggled for years to not put an axe in his brother's face, and the other one who committed sexual assault on a somewhat regular basis.
Yeah.
And it really puts it in kind of a scary light. And to connect it all the way through to An Act of Killing is you want to say that these Scorsese gangster films sort of just, they let our blood out. They let it out of our blood. Well, there are people who watch these films and get inspired and commit these atrocities.
Well, yeah, and listen, I get pitched by publicists all the time about tons of movies that I will never see. And so many of them are things like The Hitman's Bodyguard or Revenge, and it's got some woman with a gun. And personally, I really think that we've all been so desensitized and barraged with movie violence, and there's a price to pay for that. And also, I think with video games, I think you know all these video games. What's the bad one? Where one of the first ones?
Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah,
it's just horrible. I played Grand Theft Auto. I'm not a video gamer by any stretch of the imagination, but when I was in my hometown, this is a long time ago. This is almost I don't know. 18 years ago, and I went over. We were at an old friend's house, and went over there with some friends, and they were playing Grand Theft Auto, and I spent a good 45 minutes to an hour playing Grand Theft Auto, and then we went, and I was driving. I had a rental car, a nice rental car, and I felt that my physiology was changed when I got behind the wheel of the car. I felt, the stuff that was in my brain. I was so juiced up from playing that game that I was not in my right mind. And, they use these video games to train soldiers for combat. And I think that these things are very dangerous. And personally, I think that the Hollywood's propensity for violence and gun violence in specific has really done a lot of harm to the culture. And here's what I have to say. The point that I want to make about Crumb, though, is that he's such a gifted artist, and he works very fast. A lot of the film, you're seeing him drawing. You're seeing him actually... I mean, the guy is an artist. There's no question about it. And so it's a guy with a pen and a piece of paper, it's just a different thing. And for him, to have created Fritz the Cat, which he completely disowned, was very unhappy with what
as the film that they
with what Ralph Bakshi did with that, bastardized it, and how the Keep on Trucking character became this icon for the Grateful Dead, and he hated the Grateful Dead.
He spent all the time in the Haight-Ashbury, and people assumed he was part of that scene. He was like, I hated the music.
And that's another great thing that this movie does, is that it's such a San Francisco movie. I'm glad that we got to this point, because just like with Louis Bluey, this movie is what Zwigoff really captures in the movie is this San Francisco experience. And I lived in San Francisco for 12 years. And so San Francisco it's a tricky place because it's so minority driven, and there's so many different factions and fractious minorities existing.
In subcultures, you mean?
Yeah, it's like subculture of subculture of subculture, and of course it's flooded with homeless people. So it's just a very tricky, problematic place, and you really get the sense of that hotbed. That's the hotbed where these guys are coming from, and it's dirty, it's nasty,
and it is specifically grounded in the height of the Haight-Ashbury late 60s period, right? I'm not sure exactly when he moved there, but I think it was roughly the same time that the Dead were there. He was actually friends with Janis Joplin.
Yep.
It is roughly the same time as the Kool-Aid acid tests, and you do hear Crumb talk about his exposure to LSD and how that affected his work.
Yeah, he was like stoned on LSD for 3 months or something. He took some. He talks
about the permanent effect of it,
and that really changed his art. He may have only taken it once, but somehow it was some heavy acid that stayed in his system for a long time.
I watched the 8 hours of the Grateful Dead documentary, and even if you don't like the Dead, which I know Cole you don't,
I despise the Grateful Dead with a fucking passion.
There might be 2 hours of it that are interesting to watch the effect of LSD on someone's creative output. And that documentary is very good at making it clear what the before and after was. And this glosses over in a similar way.
Put it in a nutshell. What was it?
It seems like there was, with the Dead, a shift in their musical abilities and sense of having to stay within specifically certain time signatures, certain chord progressions, and it didn't just step into more complex ones, but it correlated with their transition to more world music. And what stuck with me after watching it was their incorporation of drum beats and tempos that were really outside of the norm for that music that you would think that people could never get behind, and they found a way to integrate that into and creating music that was seemingly a lot more complex than that scene would have allowed for. Mm-hmm. And what I think people forget about a revolutionary countercultural thing is there's a lot of norms that you're dealing with.
Oh yeah.
You talk about the free love era. You know what you couldn't be in the free love era is a square. You couldn't be a sexually repressed person who is obsessed with girls with big butts and big legs. And that's what's interesting about Crumb is in this era of wavy, androgynous people with long wavy
Well, no, hair. Wait a minute. The free love era, the 60s, there were, I would say, the wafy thing came later. I mean, sure, you had people like Edie Sedgwick and Twiggy, but, the reality of Woodstock is, floppy girls with big titties. It's not seriously. But
I will say that they filled a different place in. I would say Crumb's consciousness was not sexualized towards what the hippie ideal was, and his sexual proclivities were, as described in this, non-sexual. Exactly, they were about riding people. They were about
sitting on girls' boots.
Yeah,
wrestling.
He was more connected, I would say, to the sort of John Waters kink culture, to that fetishistic environment,
which is interesting because it's a way of relating that's it has a primal aspect to it that it in a way, I hate to use the word Trump anymore, but it kind of trumps because but
that word's literally triggering.
But it trumps. Yeah, it was. But it trumps intellectualizing something. It's just there's something more very immediate about I want to get I'm a guy who wants to get on a woman's back and ride you around, and the woman is thinking I'm a woman who wants you to get on my back and I want to carry you around. You know what I mean? It has this very immediacy to it,
and that's not what everyone would be in store for. It expresses that there is a kinship between people, a matching between people that have
the compatibility,
these compatibility of kinks. And it's not just
Yep. And also,
that's not the ethos of the free love era, which in doing more, I don't want to call it research because it's really just watching movies and like reading some books. There's a lot of conformity to what that looked like. And I think what's very iconoclastic about Crumb is saying, yes, I want to express my sexuality. Yes, a lot of it is fucked up. And it doesn't look like all of these things here. What's a very kinky outsider thing to want is to want to dress like you're some beatnik from the 40s in the middle of Woodstock, which is essentially what he was doing. Is if we're really so liberated, why, Janis Joplin, do I have to wear the same shit as everyone else?
Yeah, the thing with Janis Joplin is she knows that he's not getting any at the time, and she says, "Oh, if you just grow your hair long and wear some bell bottoms and high heel shoes, I think you'll do all right." He's
a conformity in the midst of total social revolution that I think he really chafed against, and was ultimately his superpower in a certain way.
Yeah. Well, and also his art. He was somebody who was very clearly gifted and this jovial, articulate guy. Anybody would like to sit and talk to this guy. He's an interesting person, and he's interested in people.
He is.
He wants to listen to people. He's a great listener.
He is. I love, we always like play the movie now when we're talking about it, and this is a scene where we meet a woman who it turns out he dated at one point, and she's a pornographer. She is a founder of Big Butts magazine, and she's so interesting.
That's Big Butt magazine, by the way. That's right.
Big Butt. Just the one.
That's right. It's Big Butt magazine, yes.
And I'd watch a movie about her. She has the most interesting deadpan.
Yeah, and she's sexy.
She
looks like she's got like the Patti Smith thing going. She's got the white shirt with the black tie. She had a man's tie.
What's so interesting
loosely hanging
about her is that she seems both an entirely sexual being and someone who is never aroused by anything. She's so matter of fact, and I don't agree with that. I think she's and Leg Show. She also was the magazine editor for Leg Show. Her speech pattern is so fascinating, and what interested me about Robert is that he was not interested in traditional sexual things, but would rather ride on someone, or perhaps sit on their shoes. And there is a rumor, and many things are rumored about Robert, but there was a rumor that he had an enormous penis. And I can attest that though he is not interested in using it for normal sexual proclivities, Robert is endowed with one of the largest penises in the world. Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. All right, and her name is Diane Hansen. Diane spelled D-I-A-N Hansen. She's fascinating. I want to know what she's up to. Yeah, she's super cool. Yeah, and you can totally see how she's his type. She's wearing bangs, but she's got really long hair that's almost down to her waist. Yeah, she's cool. He is a strange person in my sort of psychology, in my head, because I can go around the world and see people who I would know he would be sexually attracted to and are his type. And can I mention to you, and this doesn't make me sound like a very likable person, but you know who else has that effect on me, who I look around and they're not necessarily someone that I would go gaga over, but
Angelina Jolie.
No, I'm saying, but someone whose sexual type is kind of burned into my head, and I look around. No. I'm not saying like the attraction, but like another man's whose preferences are built in. So I can look around and be like, oh, you know who would like that person is Ted Bundy.
Oh,
he liked pretty young girls with dark black hair that was split down the middle, and so it's like I see a woman, and I was just listening to a biography of him. I have to explain this a little bit, and I go around and I see like, oh, that's Ted and Ted Bundy type, and I feel awful about having that thought. But you go around and you see a girl with curly hair, with thick thighs and like a big butt, and you go like, oh, that's a real crummy. And
well, here he is with a bunch of redheads, and I didn't really when we first saw this, I didn't realize that they're all redhead. I guess there's one strawberry blonde thrown in the midst, and it's Crumb. It's a photo shoot with Crumb hanging out with a bunch of hot younger chicks, and
so this scene is like,
and that in itself, because people have whatever ideas about redheaded girls. He seems to like redheads.
Okay, let's say this is a scene that is a lesson in objectification.
Totally, but he likes to be objectified. They're all standing on him.
Oh, but he is the cover of this magazine, this issue. He's or at least the lead of this issue. He's going to be celebrated as the person whose gaze is determining these women who are there, and we're never introduced to them.
I don't think so. I don't think his gaze is determining their sexuality. I think that's a pretty proto-feminist.
I don't think so. I think
really. Well,
no,
it was set up by a woman. I think there's that scene where they all have their feet on him. I don't know. I think it's dominance and objectification through like masochism, but really, I mean, let's talk about it. I think Robert Crumb is a misogynist. Yes. Look, all right. Let's put things into perspective here. Role play is role play, right? And I think that it works both ways. And I think that, to come in and try and say, this, oh, verily, but for my taste, this is to this or to that. I think that's not really fair. I think that, if everybody's happy, then everybody's happy.
Well, a lot of people who had a close relationship with Robert Crumb don't seem to be happy about the experience. Really?
He seems to have a great relationship. He can have conversations. Look at this conversation that he's having.
I was talking about this conversation. She talks. This is when he's on a sort of porch.
He's on a roof
with an ex-girlfriend, and she says things about their relationship, such as, "So you really thought you were a good guy? You would tell me you were hundreds of miles away, and then I would see you at the grocery store with another woman." He was a player, for lack of a better word. But and at other points in the movie, he talks about how he has a hatred towards women. There is a animosity, an obsession, a compulsion, a love towards a certain female archetype. But I think he's someone who's much more comfortable in the company of women, but now I think in society it's a good time to talk about the person who is, though more comfortable with the women than a sort of masculine jock type, also has disdain towards women and an aggression and a desire to
all I can say
them.
is there's nothing aggressive about Robert Crumb.
He is touching this woman. She's uncomfortable.
He's reassuring her.
He's a married woman, and he's giving. This is a totally creepy scene. Cole.
He's not a married woman, and there's nothing creepy about this scene.
I'm sorry. He's a married man, is what I'm going to say. He's a married man.
No, there's nothing creepy. There's nothing creepy about this scene.
You should put the subtitles on. She is talking about how he was not.
Look at how they are together.
Yeah, he's touching her face, and she's pushing him away.
And look at how
and she is critiquing him, and he's making kissy faces. She right now is talking about her issues with him. This is so simple.
Mike, they're communicating. Look at she's smirking. She's smiling.
Yeah,
she's smiling.
She's smirking about how Robert Crumb is a bad person to be in.
Mike,
I watched this scene yesterday. I know what it's about.
I do too. And they're having a good time. They're having a good conversation.
He is dominating. He is dominating this with his jovialness and undercutting her experience.
That's not
gaslighting her.
That's not true at all. No, he's letting her say her piece.
He's interrupting her the whole time.
This is how people communicate. This is communication, Mike.
This is how people stop communication.
No, I think you're being immature, Mike. I really do.
I don't.
Yeah, I think you're being immature, man. I think that, all's fair in love and war.
He's grabbing her by the neck, and she kicks him in the leg because she's having such a great time.
No, listen, man. They're communicating. They're having a good time.
He's grabbing her. He's
not grabbing her.
He is.
He's communicating with her. He's not being aggressive at all. Come on, Mike. Settle down. I think you're painting him with your own brush.
There is one person who I think one woman at least he has a good relationship with.
His daughter?
I think he does have a good relationship with his daughter. I
think he has a great relationship with his daughter, and I think he has a great relationship with his wife.
And his son is also featured in it, and it seems...
It seems like he's got a great relationship with his son.
It seems perhaps a little more tense with his son, but his son is a brooding 20-something kid.
Well, it seems like, that things were probably not so perfect with his son, but I love how he's very attentive. His son's an artist. His son is a very talented artist.
Yes.
And I love how Crumb goes over and they're having this discussion about how you draw this person, this photo draw from a photograph, and you didn't quite get the tilt of her head right, but you got the attitude. And he really is there. He's a very present person, and that's what I want to say is this guy is very present, and I think for all the maliciousness that you're trying to put on this person, I say that he's far kinder than that brush paints him.
Let me quote his son though.
He's very honest. He's gonna say things about himself that aren't that are not attractive. How many people that?
Let me quote his son talking about the relationship, and his son is a sort of brooding philosophy type.
Don't say sort of. Anymore.
His
killing me.
His son is kinda one of the
ever killing me. We're not NPR, folks. We're not. I swear.
His son is one of those brooding intellectual types. So his voice is a bit like, so the old man, he's not very emotional, and so I kind of want to tell him, I kind of want to, put my arm around him or express an emotion at him, and the old man is a bit, I
love that he calls him the old man.
Yeah,
by the way,
he's sort of distant.
He's the old man. I love that. That's cool.
It seems he's a bit stodgy. He's difficult to reach, but I will say that for whatever distance exists between a father and a son, there is, if this is a true indicator of their there-ness, the scene of them drawing together is very...
It's very telling.
It's very adorable.
It's very telling. And hearing his wife talk about him and seeing how he is with his wife, if you want to know about Crumb's relationship with women, look at the relationship that he's in, because
they sleep with different people. What are you talking about? She says that she sleeps with other people because he does too. I guess
no, that they did. They don't currently sleep with other people.
My recall is that she does.
I did not get that.
Go to the tape at some point. But I think which is, if they're comfortable with that in an open relationship, that's fine. But he says at another point that he's never been in love, including his current marriage. He's a flawed guy. Give him that. He wants you to think that.
I'm not saying that he's anything less. I think he's a very interesting, complicated person. But I also think that in all of his human interactions, and we do witness him constantly interacting with people, that he's always got a smile on his face, and he's never less than candid. And I did spend a half hour with the guy having a conversation. I can tell you it was a very comfortable half hour, that I spent talking to him. I thought he was just a great guy, and he's a very talented artist.
He's a very talented artist. I get the sense that he wants to control the energy.
And I don't want to, I don't want to put too fine a point on it. But when you're talking about like Pete Mondrian or Pablo Picasso,
these guys were fucking dicks. Yeah, right.
I'm just saying. There's something to be said for real artistry.
Yeah.
And genius, and it's rare, and it's a very highly regarded thing. And this guy is on that level. And so his son, we're looking at this right now, we're looking at the sequence where his son's drawing from a photograph, and his son shares that gene. So I think that there's a lot to be said for the value of the artist.
Well, in the wide styles that he can achieve are mind-blowing.
He can do whatever he wants, no question. This guy can do whatever. He give him a pen and a piece of paper, and he can draw anything.
And this film does an excellent job of showing that he has a style which evolved, moved different directions. He had these cycles. And then you see other things, and it's almost out of nowhere. It's a completely different style. It is amazing. It is mind-blowing, and I want to put almost every piece I see on my wall and I'm obsessed with. I own one collection of his drawings, and it's actually, and it came out much longer, after this film came out. He illustrated the entire book of Genesis from the Bible.
Wow.
And it's fascinating. It's not a joke. It's not over the top.
Yeah.
It's, if anything, in what is demonstrated in this movie relates to it, it's his portraits of the greats of American blues. It is these really interesting, very Middle Eastern looking depictions of the characters in the book of Genesis. And it's beautiful. It's as good of it's much more true to the spirit, I feel, than an illustrated manuscript or something that is more highfalutin than what the text is. And I think for someone who is so countercultural, for someone who's so explicit with sexuality, to go back to the book of Genesis and draw these really interesting, deep, pathos-filled things is just proof of his genius.
Well, and he also, if any of you seen the Cheap Thrills album cover for Big Brother and the Holding Company, Janis Joplin's record, I think he got paid $600 to draw that, and it recently got sold, or did get sold, as they say in the movie, for about $22,000. And I like this scene where they're showing the photographs, how he would take these photographs of cityscapes so that he could capture things like the electric wires and telephone wires and all this detail that he puts into his work. Robert Crumb is an incredibly interesting individual, an incredibly interesting artist, and this movie, Terry Zwigoff's movie, it's on Filmstruck. If you have Filmstruck, watch it. If you don't have Filmstruck, get Filmstruck. It's much better than Hulu, I promise. And thank you all so much for listening. Please remember to turn your cell phones off when you're walking, driving, riding a bicycle, or watching a movie. And while you're at it, please do us a favor. We know that we have a lot of listeners in the UK, in Japan, all these crazy places. If you could afford to give us just $5 a month to do the work that it is that we do, that would be very helpful to us. Thank you all so much for listening. Bon appetit.